Okay, welcome back to the Marvelous Old World podcast. My name is Matthew Smith, 1882. This is the Yesler Leary building. Once again, Henry Yesler's name attributed to an important slice of Seattle's history. This building was in what is now Pioneer Square, was called Occidental Square for some time. This is 1882. And honestly, when I first saw this building, I almost fell out of my chair. At this early period, by 1882, there may have been, again, 10,000, 15,000 people at most. And again, if you think half of those are men of working age, you know, we're down to 5,000 to 8,000 workers. And then out of that, how many are lumberjacks? How many are millers? How many are building the residential houses made out of this wood? How many are farmers, fishermen, trappers, merchants, so forth and so forth and so forth? And then out of those that are left, how many are master masons? You know, when I have these conversations with people, what's often, you know, the rejoinder that's often, you know, put on the table as well. They knew how to build things back then. And yes, they did know how to build things back then. Yeah, there was master craftsmen that were coming from Europe as immigrants. I get that. But you got to have enough of them, and you got to have enough resources to work with, and you got to have enough time. This is in 1882. Why so big? I just have to ask this question again and again. How are these being heated? It gets cold here. I hope I don't sound like a broken record, but I think a lot of these points bear repeating. This is ornate craftsmanship, broken arches. I mean, columns, capitals, bases, everywhere. The detail on this building is exquisite. The amount of time it would have taken to do this, the amount of resources that it would have taken to do this, the amount of labor power, and the architecture is just magnificent. So I was challenged by somebody who left a comment in my last video on Seattle Underground, and she took issue with the fact that I used the term old world to describe, to qualify architecture in Seattle, some architecture. She said, basically, my terminology is twisted, and don't you know the old world is in the east and the new world is in the west? Well, you know, here's my response. What else do I call this? This is an old world building, if I've ever seen one. And what is this top made out of? Is this roof here? Is this metal? It sure looks like it. It looks riveted. So this kind of building just absolutely takes my breath away. And here it shows up in 1882, according to the official record, on what was just previously, and you saw the drawing only maybe a couple of short decades ago, was tidal flats, was an extension of the bay. This is why I pointed that out at first. In Yesler was, you know, according to that drawing, you know, was a little island in the middle of the bay. And now here we are with this building. Now, and it's not just that building, it's this one, it's this one. It keeps going. Look at these ones. These are all stone and brick, and ornate, every one of them. I mean, this looks like it could have been, I don't know, Paris, New Orleans, and horses and buggies. And then sidewalks that are just all janky. I should say streets that are janky, and, you know, sidewalks that are, it looks like wood, but I can't tell for sure. So this is where I really start to part ways with what's being presented to us as the history of Seattle. Here is another view. I like this one because the resolution is really crisp, and you can see, I mean, these are angels carved up here. This kind of curved French mansard type roof, this must have been metal. And please remember this building, because according to history, otherwise known as boosterism, this lived for all of 7 years and was disappeared in the 1889 fire. Does this look like a building that has seen less than 7 years when this photograph was taken? Or does this look like a building that has been around for a very long time? This doesn't look like a few years old to me. And what is this up here? A weather vane telling us which way the wind blows. Well, now, again, 1882, here's the Yesler Leary building. And what do we have here? You know, that row of ornate brick and stone buildings went down that street. But here we've got a whole nother block. And this is the Occidental building. Okay? And I'm going to ask you to remember this one as well, because the Occidental building was also disappeared in the Great Fire. And when I say disappeared, I mean poof, gone by a fire. And this is a stone building. And what we have is a horse-drawn streetcar. And that's what the storybooks, the history books tell us, is that at this time in 1882, Seattle had a horse-drawn trolley system. Okay? That's a lot of infrastructure to put in just to pull some people around by horse, but I guess that's what you do. Again, here we are, 1984. What's going on up here? What is going on? This is stone. Look at these details, the attention to detail, the time. And I'm sorry, but this is not the kind of building you just throw up in a year or two or even. And one of the things when we talk about attribution, look at this person just creepily peeking through the dark window, my goodness. When we talk about attributing, time and resources and who built what and when and who is the architect, one of the things that almost never comes up, and I never really hear about it, is who engineered it. Because you don't just design this on a back of an envelope and send it to the contractor and his old world craftsmen, immigrants that just got off the boat from Europe and made it to Seattle in a covered wagon, just throwing all this together. This stuff has to be engineered. And then foundations have to be put in, right? And all of this takes time. All of it, each piece of it takes time. And speaking of foundations being put in, here we have again these very strange windows down at the street grade. And I don't know why you would do that. I understand that you'd want to get light into a basement, but if you're designing this from scratch with all of the attention, the exquisite attention to detail being put in, you probably wouldn't want water just kind of flowing in off of the sidewalk into your basement level. One more view for posterity of the Occidental Hotel. Now here I find this interesting. This is again one of these boosters and artist renderings to send to newspapers. But in this image, what we're being shown is a level grade. Windows down at these strange windows down at the street, at the sidewalk. But this is fairly level. And then when we look back on the old one, this looks like a hill going up and up, doesn't it? So whatever was going on down here, as shown in that picture, if that picture is to be believed, would have been covered by this slope. So, again, put a bookmark, if not an asterisk, a lot of detail, a lot of ornamentation, and a lot of these are interesting. These they look like chimneys. So is that an answer to the question, like how was it heated? Was it just stuffed with fireplaces? Or maybe it had some kind of convection radiant type heating system. Not to be outdone, we have Fry's Opera House. Now, here again, this is a drawing. Remember boosterism? So this probably would have appeared in a newspaper of the time and been sent out around the country to promote Seattle as a destination city. But here in the early 1800s, with our population hovering around 12 to 15,000 people, this is a lot of beautiful, exquisite, ornate stone brick buildings with all sorts of metallurgy. Remember, folks, the railroad still isn't even here yet. The coal railroad is, but not the transcontinental railroad. So where are we getting all our stuff? Where are we getting all our materials? How are we building all of this with so few people in so little time? Now, speaking of boosters, and so this is interesting. This is the same building, the Fry Opera House. You can see there's little discrepancies in how the artist portrayed, this or that portico, but generally speaking, they were true to it, except that on this one, we're missing our top. What happened to this? Now, that's not something that you just kind of etch a sketch out of the picture, because this is kind of cool. It's part of the composition. So where'd the tower go? And why'd they take it down? If this was just built, well, this drawing isn't that old. They built that and then they just lopped off the top. So, okay, taking note. And here we have a streetcar again. Oh, but on this streetcar, there's no horse. There's no horse pulling this one. This one is just kind of moving on its own. So what is that about? Was it just horse-drawn trolleys? Or did Seattle have some other kind of infrastructure at that very early time in its history? Now, First United Methodist Church is said to have been built in 1889, the year of the Great Fire. And one thing I find curious about churches, sacred buildings, as well as universities, incidentally, is that they often don't make it into the determination of the who, what, and when, and how of city development. They're just kind of over there. They're mysterious. It's like there's other forces at play. And, while we focus on the history of cities, the history of urban development, but here it is. And here, and it's marvelous. I mean, it's like a miniature cathedral. I would have loved to have been in this building and seen it from the inside. Little rose window, giant doors. Why so big? That door looks like it must be 15 feet tall. Again, why so big? Why so tall? Yeah, the glory of God. I understand that. But really? Because you're letting in a lot of cold air every time you open that. So, at some point you do have to you have to address, practicalities. I see this building and I marvel at it. Miniature cathedral built in 1889 in Seattle. And what's going on up here? This looks like a bejeweled antenna. Is that pulling etheric energy out of the atmosphere and bringing it down, connecting a circuit between heaven and earth, as above, so below? Certainly seems like it. Fortunately, this building escaped the Great Fire. It began in the year of the fire, but wasn't in the path of the fire. Unfortunately, it didn't escape the regrade projects. So the congregation moved to another building, and this was razed to the ground because there was greater forces at work, greater earthly forces, and by greater, I mean malicious forces with malice that would just knock something like this down. It made it all the way to, I think, in 1907 before it was regraded. So this building was all of 17, 18 years old. And like the Yesler Leary building and the Occidental building, I have a hard time believing that this building was only a few years old when this photo was taken. A really hard time, because this looks like, to me, old world architecture. Now, Central High School. Remember those blurry images from earlier and those cartoonish kind of sketches? This is Seattle Central High School at that time. 1889, when people weren't busy building cathedrals and putting in trolley lines, building Providence Hospital twice. We haven't even gotten to Denny Hotel yet. Building railroad systems, cutting down old growth forests, feeding their family, tending to their farms, fishing in the Puget Sound, running their stores. When they weren't busy doing all of that work, I guess this is what they were building in 1889. It's breathtaking. I guess we just call it a style and move on. Richardsonian Romanesque. So there, we named it. It made it to the 1950s. Now there's a highway, interstate highway, and the souls of the departed remain disturbed in Seattle. And why did they take the tower off this? If you remember the photo from the 1950s, right before it was demolished, there was no tower removed. What's going on here? Is this a bell? Some kind of timekeeping mechanism? Are these more of those etheric antennas firing up radiant fireplaces full of antiquitech? I love that term. More strange chimneys. Was it smoke pouring out of here? I don't see soot. I don't see soot on this chimney. This looks like some kind of a venting system. Was this natural? Was this air conditioned? I remember studying Frank Lloyd Wright buildings that were air conditioned naturally or through convection currents. Is that what this was? Now, this building is attributed to the architect named Boone. And Boone, like Richardson, is said to have built many, many, many buildings in Seattle in this era. Many of the exquisite buildings of this time were attributed to this architect. Boy, was he busy, because every detail is considered. And I'm not saying that we don't have the skills. I'm saying that we do. I'm saying we don't have the time. And I'm saying we don't have the resources. And by we, I mean the people that were there at the time. And in 1889, I'll just say it one more time, why such tall ceilings and all of this volume in here to heat a cold climate? Why all these attics upon attics? And I know for a fact that these aren't just empty spaces up here. You know, there's things going on up in these roof structures. I'd give anything to have been able to walk up there and see, or just go up into this tower before they took it down. Why would you go through the trouble of removing this? And we'll see that again. We'll see it again and again. These buildings, towers removed. Why? You just built this masterful piece of architecture and then you just cut its head off. Did it offend somebody? There's our booster. Kind of diminishes it, but hey, at least they were trying to tell the world that this existed way out here in the Northwest in Seattle.
They used to tell me I was building a dream,